Hey folks! 1935, radio host Walter Winchell, describing on the air the work of his colleague Martin Bloch, calls him by a new term, disc jockey.
Many of you will remember Moonlight Serenade as the musical signature.
Since then, the term has caught on. An acronym has appeared, DJ, the derivative name of this work, DJing, and most importantly, the term has gradually migrated from radio to dance floors. I'm sure you don't need me to explain who a DJ is, although, hold on, do you really know what a DJ does?
What the fuck do DJs actually do?
For instance, I often find people think these guys behind the console are literally making music on the fly. But no, I'll reveal a dark secret. The console is a music player. And details aside, a DJ doesn't create music during a party. He puts it on. Yeah, a DJ just plays pre-made tracks. And more often than not, they were made by other people. At this point, people who are out of the loop usually have their world crumble. But does that make a DJ's job useless and talentless? Of course not. Because the value of such a professional is something else entirely. The DJ's job is to set the mood, and usually, though not always, to get the audience dancing, to spend a lot of time choosing among millions of tracks that will gather a full dance floor, to feel the mood of the crowd, to put the tracks in the order that prevents people from getting bored, and moreover, masterfully mix, to run songs one after the other so that no one notices a junction or transition. And believe me, this is an art of itself. For me personally, the main tool of DJing is their music taste, and I think that only after understanding all this, any snobs and skeptics finally begin to understand this profession and the philosophy of the whole dance culture. Over time, and with the advent of new technology in music, many DJs have had the desire and ability to create music, and some DJs became producers as well. The subject of our today's video is not just a DJ and not just a producer. One of the most popular and most influential DJs and producers in history, who's also, surprisingly, a producer project himself. The man who elevated the profession and changed the industry by showing that performers are not the only ones who can be the center of attention. And yes, the man who changed music certainly didn't know music notation or how to play musical instruments. His name is David Guetta. Today's video is going to be very exciting and in many ways surprising. Recording this episode, I'm terrified to imagine how I'm going to edit it, because you and I are in for lots and lots of hits tonight. Let's go. Well, let's start with what may have come as a surprise to many. The fact that I called David Guetta a producer project. Yeah. Let me explain. If you read opinions about him on the internet, ask people who are involved in the subject, many will say that David Guetta, in fact, is just a promoted name and the face of a successful project, the result of the work of dozens of people. At this point, the audience probably split into two, those in the know and those hearing about it for the first time. And believe me, I have a lot of fascinating things to say to both, but a little later. For now, let's get to the characters. Our protagonist, David Guetta, was born in the 60s in Paris. And yes, it would actually be more accurate to use the original French pronunciation of his name, David Guetta. But in this video, let me say his name in a more globally familiar English-sounding manner, especially since the man himself hasn't minded for a long time.
Nearly 30 years ago, David Guetta has built a global musical empire.
Okay, the birth. David spent his childhood, adolescence and adult life in Paris. There, at the age of 12, he became interested in DJing. And at 14, he was putting on music at parties. Club life is a very important part of his career. David's solo journey as an artist began with his first massive single, Just a Little More Love.
Just a little more love, just a little more peace.
The song, which is how many of us here in Europe learned his name in the first place. Now, it came out in 2001. And David was already 34 years old. I mean, 20 years before that, he had devoted himself to clubbing and was a cult figure in that sphere. In the 80s, he was a resident of several clubs at once, simultaneously throwing his own parties as a promoter. In the early 90s, he was a manager of the club. Later, he became one of the most prominent residents in Ibiza. All in all, quite a career. David discovered house music in 1987.
Avoir une idée, c'est la même chose qu'à la limite un musicien qui crée une partition.
He just got obsessed with it and infected the whole Paris with his obsession, organizing the house parties there long before the French capital became one of the centers of electronic music.
Ce qu'on appelle aux États-Unis les DJ de bedroom, c'est-à-dire c'est
Before establishing a full-fledged solo career, he tried releasing his own tracks twice. For the most part, they were records for clubs. They didn't have a chance to get into the mainstream, and David had no such ambitions. But it all changed in the late 90s. The success of Daft Punk spawned a whole wave of new music from French DJs. David and his friend and colleague Joachim Garou were riding this wave. They created the label Gum Productions. The first track they released is the aforementioned Just a Little More Love.
Just a little more love, just a little more peace.
The recording was a success in France. In Europe, it was released by the Virgin label. And following France, the track got popular in the Netherlands, Sweden, and even the UK.
All it takes to live a dream.
Followed by Love Don't Let Me Go. And other tracks. And it all culminates in the solo album Just a Little More Love, the same name as the debut single. An insanely loud start. The record sells hundreds of thousands of copies. Critics notice the new star. Electro House is gaining momentum. But there's a twist. And no, I'm not talking about the powerful people behind the scene yet, but about someone who should seemingly be in the spotlight by default. You all know his voice very well, but not everyone is likely to remember his name. The name is Chris Willis.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?
He's an American singer originally from Ohio. Chris spent his youth in Alabama, where he first attended a religious college and later sang gospel music in churches.
I will never count him out, for I'm a witness of.
Gradually, Chris began releasing his own songs.
Out of my hands, put it into my heart.
And recording vocals for others as a session musician. He once traveled to Paris for one of his jobs, where he met our protagonist. After recording their first accidental collaboration, Chris Willis was a little hesitant. I don't think God would appreciate it, and I might go to hell, he told David, according to the man. I'm not sure he meant it literally. What do you mean, said Guetta? It's the opposite. Imagine you're preaching. So that's how they settled it. Just a Little More Love. Love Don't Let Me Go. Love Is Gone. Later, Getting Over. All the first hits that made David Guetta a household name, and many more later, were sung by this man.
What are we supposed to do after all that we've been through?
It was David's signature voice, so to speak. And come on, don't deny it. Some of you thought it was David Guetta singing 20 years ago.
Just know I can't take up on you.
Ghostwriter, more like a ghost singer. Everyone knows his voice, but somehow he remained in the shadows. Whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, I'll tell you my opinion later. And you can leave yours in the comments below the video right now. Can't wait to read them afterwards. In the meantime, our video is about electronic music, and I can't talk about it without playing around with samples. This episode is quite a big one, so I'll try to keep it short. Well, I hope you find it entertaining. I will recreate a small piece of a fairly big hit. Let's take 3 instruments for this purpose. Here, I'm gonna have a pre-made drum loop like this. We're in a dancing mood today. This video is so electronic focused that I decided to diversify it a bit and use more vintage plugins. I like using this more, so let's just say I'll recreate it in my own way. We're gonna use the Solina pad from Arturia. We have these 3 simple chords. Let's multiply them and add a higher octave. Epic. Moving on, it's time for bass. We're getting some Jean-Michel Jarre vibes here, but no, it would sound completely different with a beat. Now for the fun part, the sample, and we're gonna use a song straight out of 1982 by the band Simple Minds. I'm sure post-punk and new wave fans will recognize it. If this is the first time you've heard it, I highly recommend it. A really great band. The song is called Someone Somewhere in Summertime. It's like guitar driven, it has choruses, delays, it's very 80s-esque. From here, we'll take the intro. You must admit, it's beautiful. It's real cool and probably reminds me of something. Okay, we're gonna take this very intro before the lead vocal. Let's speed it up to fit in our square, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, something's missing, and I will tell you what it is. I'll combine everything but the drums and do this thing. Now it's commonly referred to as a sidechain effect. Although the very concept of sidechain is slightly different, but I will not bore you with details right now, let's just do it. I made it so that the moment the bass drum hits the downbeat, the rest has its volume turned down. This way, first of all, we give sound space to this drum because it's the main rhythm keeper. It makes people dance. And second, we'll create this pumping effect. Let me illustrate it with just a volume knob. To avoid doing it manually, I have a special plugin that does it automatically. Let's compare. That's how it all sounds without this technique, and that's how it changes the sound. You must admit, the effect is obvious. Those of you who didn't know how DJs and electronic musicians achieve this, you'll be hearing this pumping effect everywhere now. Anyway, did you recognize the song? It's of course The World Is Mine.
The world is mine.
This reminds me of that meme where Chuck Norris says, "Hey David Guetta, what do you mean the world is mine?" It's a great song and a big hit too. The most fascinating thing about it is that it has new wave, a sample from the 80s, which itself creates a huge part of the overall vibe. And of course, its vocals are also interesting. This peculiar low voice belongs to a very obscure singer too. His name is J.D. Davis. He's Belgian. He's also a DJ, a musician, and a vocalist as well. But of course, the most popular thing he did was the vocals for this song.
I believe there's new life to gain.
And a few other tracks by David Guetta. A lot of people confuse his voice with that of Depeche Mode's Dave Gahan. Let me know in the comments if you've ever done that yourself. And there's this really funny story I read somewhere. I can't guarantee this is 100% true, but I saw it in several sources. That once, after some festival, organizers drove David Guetta and Paul Oakenfold in the same car. And The World Is Mine was playing on the radio at that moment. Paul said, "Wow, so cool. Someone remixed Depeche Mode." And David said, "This is my song." Paul said, "Wow, so cool. Did you do a Depeche Mode remix?" So Guetta told him the whole story. They met, he gave him his CD, they became friends. And that's how Paul organized his performance at Ultra. EDM fans definitely know Ultra Music Festival. Only now I realized the funniest part of the story. We just mentioned Depeche Mode. So in case you didn't know, Ultra Music Festival is named after Depeche Mode's album Ultra. So there you go. Moving on. Another fun fact is that the 2000s David Guetta is a purely European thing. Don't believe me? Let's take a look at the chart performance of his records. The debut album sold 4,000 copies in the United States. Just a Little More Love, Love Don't Let Me Go, and The World Is Mine played all around Europe, were unknown to anyone in the US at the time of their release.
What are we supposed to do after all that we...
David Guetta's first breakthrough there is Love Is Gone, at number 98 on the Billboard chart.
Can't find the reason to keep holding on.
But the song had a huge success in the clubs. Let me explain the difference.
Now that the love is gone.
When electronic dance music has been a commonplace on the radio in Europe since the 90s, in the US, it was underground, in the clubs. This is largely how the concept of Eurodance emerged. After all, despite the fact that house and techno were born in the US, they never had place on American radio in the late 2000s. But the global pop music market works following a very simple pattern. If you're mainstream in the States, you're mainstream all over the world. And to get on the radio there, David needed collabs. He had to combine electronic dance music with what was popular back then, hip-hop and R&B. And now, you will hear a fascinating story about a series of coincidences that, thanks to a protagonist, not just brought his music to the mainstream, but made the mainstream sound that way. After the success of Love Is Gone in nightclubs, a lot of American stars were interested in this sound and started contacting David. The first was Kelly Rowland. Yes, that Kelly, a member of Destiny's Child who performed Dilemma. She was vacationing in Cannes, where David was playing at one of the festivals. There he was just about to launch his new track, Untitled at the time. A 130 BPM instrumental with recognizable Coldplay-inspired piano in the lead role. According to David himself, the whole dance floor was empty when he played it. All in all, it was not a good track. But it fascinated Kelly. She met David, said she loved Love Is Gone, mentioned that instrumental, suggested she should try to record something to it, and took the track to her studio. The result was a platinum hit. When Love Takes Over, which was very hard to miss in the late 2000s and early 2010s, top of the charts all over the world, even #1 in the UK charts, and that, believe me, is an achievement for a French person. But the US only ranked it at number 78. That's a bit closer. Another fan of Love Is Gone who called David was will.i.am. The song in question is even based on a sample from it. This guy, like no other, always kept up with the times, felt the trends, and sometimes shaped them. And he tried something that today seems obvious. But in 2009, he was quite unique. He banked on the European electronic dance sound in the US.
That tonight's gonna be a good night.
will.i.am invited David to produce some songs for the Black Eyed Peas. The highlight of this collab was I Got a Feeling.
That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna...
And it wasn't just a huge hit and the leader of all the world's charts. I Got a Feeling is one of the best-selling songs in history, and one of the songs that formed that period.
Fill up my cup, Mazel tov.
Its sound, its character, and most importantly, its mood.
Look at her dancing, just take it off.
The kind of carefree party spirit, which is why this song is played all over the world to this day.
Let's paint the town, we'll shut it down.
Around this point, for the first time in history, electronic dance music finally didn't just enter the mainstream, it became mainstream. Yes, this also happened in the 90s and 2000s. The notice had Timbaland, Kanye, and many others. But they rather introduced elements and worked at the intersection of hip-hop, pop, and dance music. But in the late 2000s, these three figures, the Black Eyed Peas, Lady Gaga, and David Guetta, elevated that sound to an absolute. David had only one thing to do here: to keep moving forward.
She's nothing like a girl you've ever seen before.
Sexy Chick, featuring Akon, is the first Billboard Top 5 of David's career.
Nothing you can compare to your neighborhood.
The song was the result of a chance encounter backstage of a festival, just like with Kelly Rowland.
I'm trying to find the words to describe this girl without being disrespectful.
Akon came up on stage after David. I love Love Is Gone, he said. We should work together. All right, David said. Let's go to the studio right after the show.
I'm trying to find the words to describe this girl without being disrespectful.
So, he had a fresh hit in the morning, for which he even had to remove his new album from circulation in order to add this song to it. While for some people it's just a track from the 2000s, in music history, in fact, the success of this song was a major stepping stone for electro-hop, a mainstream blend of electronic music with hip-hop and R&B from the 90s, like LMFAO, Pitbull, Flo Rida, that sort of thing. Moving on, Memories by Kid Cudi.
All the crazy shit I did tonight.
Who David also met totally by chance on the set of the Black Eyed Peas music video. The Black Eyed Peas invited Kid to just hang out as a cameo.
And do it, let's live it up and do.
David quickly formed a bond, called the guy into the studio right after the shoot because he wrote the beat in his laptop on the airplane on the way to the set. That's how one of the fastest records of David Guetta's career was born. terrific. Next up is Getting Over You. And another banger with Fergie, LMFAO, and the very same Chris Willis. Another celebrity collaboration, another smashing success. Moving on to Sweat.
I just wanna make you sweat.
With Snoop Dogg, which is really just a remix of the original song.
I just wanna get you wet, wet, wet.
It was called Wet and wasn't very popular, unlike the platinum-selling remix.
I wanna make you sweat, sweat, sweat.
And those are just the highlights. Next thing you know, David received 2 Grammy Awards and continued to release hit after hit. And so, in just a couple of years, he became the most popular DJ and producer on earth.
Without you.
I know, listening to this wholesome story, many of you are still waiting for me to finally throw in a bad apple to spoil a whole barrel and tell you who's really behind the David Guetta project. Okay, I'll start from the moment the rumors started. In 2007, Joachim Garraud, David's associate in the beginning, said the following in an interview. I'll read a quote from an interview I found on Mixed News. David is not a musician. He's not a technician. He comes over with ideas, samples, textures, sounds, etc. and puts it all together. And what a result! But it's me who's behind the machines, since it's my machinery in my studio. But the past 2 years, David has progressed, whereas before he met me, he had no computer. This spawned rumors and theories that in fact, other people were writing all the music for David. Indeed, if we look in the credits, we find dozens of people there. Here's the one and only Joachim Garraud, who is credited with David's early sound. Later, Afrojack, a much better known name, DJ'd at a very young age, flooding dance floors with his pew-pew sound.
Grab somebody sexy, tell them, hey, give me everything.
It's more of 2010's David Guetta sound. Then there's Giorgio Twinfor, who co-produced a plethora of Guetta's tracks, and a host of other studio discrete personnel involved in the creation of his music. And this really starts to look shady. It smells like a sensation. Maybe. But there's been tons of articles with titles like The Dark Side or The Real David Guetta on the internet for ages. Alas, in fact, I have to disappoint the skeptics. It's not that simple. It's much more fascinating than that. And even me didn't expect it to be so fascinating myself. When we make videos about electronic music, we have this problem. I talk about this or that hit, and when I put it in the video, I realize that it sounds wrong in a way. And the reason for that, as a rule, is some re-releases or remixes which became more popular than the originals. David had a huge amount of different re-releases, remixes, etc. He had a series of compilation albums called I'm Famous, and even a series of parties. Fuck Me I'm Famous is a brand of hits that he basically created with his wife before his solo career. So I'm gonna focus on the remixes now. It turned out to be a deep dive that I couldn't help but insert into the video right away. I'm talking about the very first hit, Just a Little More Love, I put on the official video.
Just a little more love, just a little more peace.
And I realized that I have never heard this version. It sounds amazing. It's like electro or electro house. But I remember hearing this song very differently. This is pure Joachim Garraud I was talking about. I'm pretty confident it's his signature style. And then I started looking to find the very version I've always heard.
Just a little more love, just a little more peace.
I don't know about you, but that's what this song sounds like to me.
It's all it takes to live a dream.
And it turns out it's a remix by a DJ named Wally Lopez. I checked the charts and it turns out that the original version was actually quite popular. It's just that this version is apparently more popular around here. I'm doubting it now as I'm saying it. What if I'm the only one? Let me know in the comments which version of this song is more familiar to you. And that's what I'm getting at now, that I have another version of Love Don't Let Me Go in my head. It sounds like this. Do you feel these 2007 vibes? The previous version was released in 2001, and this one is from 2006 or 2007. And I became curious about what it was, especially as it says here, David Guetta versus The Egg, Love Don't Let Me Go, Walking Away. What are these words? Who's this egg? And how come this particular version has a major feature of, shall we say, the David Guetta sound that would appear later in his career? You know what I mean, right? I mean this guitar, or sometimes he used this technique with the electric piano in the intros to his songs, like in I Got a Feeling. And you get some incredible story about how a lesser-known British band influenced David Guetta's sound and consequently the entire world sound. This band is called The Egg. I discovered it for the first time just a couple days ago. The band is generally electronic, but with touches of jazz, down-tempo, trip-hop and shoegaze. Anyway, there's a lot of great stuff in their early work. And they had this song, if you want to listen to the whole song, Walking Away 2004, which a couple years later some DJ made a remix of. He made this song completely unrecognizable. He also added this bridge to it. After that remix blew up, the band had already re-released the song as their own. And in 2007 or 2006, give or take, someone I still don't know who, there was a lot of litigation, probably the same Joachim Garraud, did a mashup combining this remix and the song David Guetta Love Don't Let Me Go 2001. Released as a bootleg in a completely illegal way, it started to gain popularity. People were dancing to it in the clubs. I'm sure you've heard this particular version. So it was created in a DIY way, and after it blew up, you want to know what David Guetta did? He recorded Love Is Gone, a song in a similar style. So it turns out that Love Is Gone, pretty much the Kiss single that made him famous among American clubbers, appeared thanks to a completely random mashup. Now I'm gonna go back to that very remix again. Back to its beginning. And what do we hear there? That signature David Guetta guitar. And what's our takeaway? Someone combined this remix with a song, Love Don't Let Me Go. This mashup accidentally blew up. It had a fun intro, which David Guetta repeated on the next track, Love Is Gone, which David Guetta repeated in I Got a Feeling, which, if I'm not mistaken, he even repeated in the song Getting Over. And maybe in some other songs, because I associate that intro solely with David Guetta. Where did it all start? with a song by a completely unknown band called The Egg. That's how another fascinating bit of trivia suddenly appeared in the video. And I found out where David Guetta got his intro from. Kelly Rowland, Aiken, Black Eyed Peas, Kid Cudi. Thanks to all these collabs, David Guetta has essentially become a worldwide superstar. But the story would be incomplete if he himself didn't help others climb to the top as well, albeit against their will. It's about to get fun again. Let's talk about a then unknown female singer. I'll start and you try to guess who I'm talking about. 2011. She's 35. She's a little known but well respected in certain circles indie singer. Besides, she's a very talented but not the most stellar songwriter. She's been performing since 1993, but after a small breakthrough in the 2000s, things went downhill. By 35, a failed album, fatigue from tours, media and concerts forced her to end her stage career, stay at home with her dogs, and write songs only for others. During another collaboration, she worked with David Guetta. They co-wrote music for Alicia Keys, but it doesn't sound like her. Then the song was offered to Katy Perry, but she didn't like it. Then they recorded it with Mary J. Blige. Someone even leaked the finished track online, but David still wasn't happy with the result. First of all, he wants to keep the song. Second of all, no one can make it sound better than the author on the demo. Do you know who I'm talking about? If not, the singer's name is Sia. That's how Titanium was born. Her first super hit, alas, prevented her from having a quiet retirement and elevated her career to an unprecedented level. Because essentially everything you know about this, dare I say, brilliant Australian singer who deserves a separate video on the channel, all these happened after the success of Titanium, which turned out to be the most successful single of David Guetta's career, even after all the things I have described. Overall, this song's history is quite conflicting. For example, in this clip here, David talks about how he was in awe of Sia's voice and just begged her to release the song. He also said that she eventually agreed with the condition that she wouldn't star in the music video, do interviews, promos, or tour performances. She would just give her voice, quietly finish her failed career, and move on to work quietly in the studio. Yes, sure. But I found an interview from 2014 on NPR where Sia herself says David just released the song without her knowledge. Anyway, one way or another, everyone was happy. It was a win-win situation, and together, these guys gave us many more hits. For example, Sia didn't write She-Wolf for herself either, and according to Sia herself, she wrote the song for Cher. But fate had a different plan, and in a huge part, thanks to our protagonist. Let me know if you're waiting for a special video dedicated to Sia in the comments. Okay, let's conclude the main intrigue. So, did David Guetta actually make his own music, or did others do it all for him? And most importantly, was it really a producer's project? Bear with me, I'll try to explain. Yes, David Guetta is a producer's project. But he's the producer of this project. As it happens, the vast majority of music lovers are still raised on rock and roll culture. It places more value on people's performance and ability to create. People from the dance culture, first of all, appreciate something else: the mood a DJ gives them. That's the point and primary philosophy of dance music. Remember, at the beginning I talked about what is expected of the person at the console. Now, David Guetta, as a natural-born DJ, creates music just like he creates the mood on the dance floor. He adjusts to it when he needs to. He controls it when he can. Yes, when David started his career, he really didn't know how to write music. But like any good DJ, he had a good taste in it. Also, he had a feel for hit songs. A concept for the project, he generated ideas and implemented them with the help of Joachim Garraud. Just like any other producer like Max Martin or Rick Rubin, who worked with arrangers, sound engineers, co-producers. For example, Rick Rubin never recorded a single note in his life, which does not stop him from being the greatest producer in history. And unlike Rick, who essentially works for hire, David works for himself in his own project. The point of producers is to produce. And producing a track is not just about the arrangement, it's about the idea, the concept, the implementation. It's about communication, networking, in which he, David, is unrivaled. The point of a producer's work is the result, not how the product was made or by whom. And if dozens of people are working on the sound of his project, it only speaks to how cool of a producer David Guetta is for this project. As for the ability to create music, he learned that quickly through practice. Of course, he had to. And just because of that, he was able to enter the world's show business. Although, by his own admission, it wasn't until he recorded I Got a Feeling with a Black Eyed Peas that he got into a big professional studio for the first time in his life. And while tons of snobbish hate has been and still is being heaped upon him, this man didn't just keep creating and creating. Thanks to his energy, his desire for constant movement, and his sincere passion for his work, he changed music. He changed the world. How? I hope you still have the energy to listen to me. First of all, French house. The 2000s, the time of the greatest boom of the French house scene. Daft Punk, Justice, Cassius, Moji, and many others. Oddly enough, David Guetta was also among them. But all this wave might not have happened if prior to that, back in the 80s, this music would not have been brought to Parisian clubs by two people, Laurent Garnier and David Guetta. The remarkable story of how, back in '87, being both a DJ and a promoter in one of the clubs, very young David got the owners of the club to organize house music parties on Mondays. On other days, this music would scare everyone away. When he got permission, he went to London and bought up just about every house record there was. He brought them to Paris and was literally the originator of an entire culture in France. Years later, everything went back to the beginning. David, like many French DJs, started his solo career on the wave of Daft Punk's success, which he himself influenced. And by the way, Thomas Bangalter personally called the Virgin label and showed them David's first records. It went back like a boomerang. Second of all, David Guetta has changed the role of a producer in pop music. Let's go back to Chris Willis here. After all, I'm sure many people believe that this insanely talented vocalist has been unfairly overlooked. But in fact, it's only because we are used to it. For generations in pop and rock music, the performer is the focus of the audience. And the people who create the music are gray, nameless employees. In electronic music, it's different. And David Guetta has brought this difference to the mainstream. He just turned the concept upside down. He's the superstar DJ here. He's the face of it. And today we would no longer be surprised to hear a female voice in a track by, for example, Calvin Harris. Whereas even 20 years ago, we didn't get it. How come? Everybody knows it's David Guetta, but it's like he's not the one singing and, stuff like that. It's not good or bad, it's just a fact. But before that, a solo artist could only be a vocalist or a guitarist, but now a DJ can also be on the pop Olympus. And we already know many such examples. Third of all, collabs. David Guetta is a master of collaborations, who very clearly showed all the validity of co-creation and even instilled a passion for it. He has recorded dozens of tracks with various stars and continues to do so to this day.
Said a hustler's work is never through.
Beating my drum like down diddy day. I like the dirty rhythm. You can say my name, if you love me, let me.
There are many reasons for this, from creative ones. With the new people comes new energy, new chemistry, and always different results. To the mercantile ones, 2 stars make a stronger promo than one. All his so-called ghostwriters are also part of life and also sharing experiences. Thanks to the young producers he works with, he has a much better sense of the time period, while at the same time sharing his vast experience with them. Fourth of all, the commercialization and the idea. David Guetta has made electronic dance music mainstream, and for that, he's both loved and hated. It's much harder to give an objective assessment here, I'll just tell you my opinion. Without people who blur boundaries, mix genres, and bring the underground into the mainstream, that underground goes into oblivion. This is a natural process. The opposite happened with electronic dance music after David helped the US discover it and helped it reach the US. Yes, partly that way it lost some flavor, uniqueness, but gained a crazy mass appeal. The scale of electronic music festivals today was unimaginable, even 15 years ago. It's undeniable. The very acronym EDM, electronic dance music, was first used only in 2010. And believe me, David's success played a key role in that. I'll be honest, I can't go on like this forever. And that's despite the fact that I'm by no means a fan of David's music. His solo performance at one of the festivals was one of the most boring I've ever seen. After all, I'm that snob raised on rock culture. But whether you like his music or not, David Guetta is an insanely inspiring example of a man who has spent a lifetime sincerely and wholeheartedly doing what he loves. And it's only people like these who see passion rather than routine in this endeavor that change our world. He's 56 now, but he's still afloat, and his new singles are still topping the charts. That said, he has more underground projects under the name Jack Back, and together with DJ Martin, they're pushing a new genre, future rave. And most importantly, whether you like it or not, the music of David Guetta and everyone involved in this project is an integral part of our lives. These are the songs that have accompanied us for the 3rd decade, and I'm sure it's not the end of it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please don't forget to like this video and of course, subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss the next story from the world of music. All the best to you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.